It's day 3 of the FPP Fussycutting challenge, and that means it's sew day. Hooray! So now we're going to sew our tiny TVs. So first thing you're going to do at your sewing machine is sort out your stitch length. Let's dial that down. I usually put it about 1.5, or sometimes I go a bit lower for foundation paper piecing. The reason this is lower is when you are stitching your fabrics, you are going through paper as well as fabric. And then we need to remove the paper at the end. So if your stitch length is lower, it will make the paper a lot easier to tear away. Don't go too tiny though, because if you make a mistake and have to unpick, it's a bit of a nightmare on a really tiny scale. So next thing I like to do is get my fabrics ready. So this one's still glued in place from when we had it all prepared yesterday. Then I like to rough cut my fabrics to size and put them in order for when I'm piecing. So what I do is I lay my template down. I've doubled this up because I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 sections here that I will be, sorry, you can see here, that I'll be cutting for the edges. And then I put my fabric against it, making sure there's a 1/4 inch either seam, and then I just rough cut those pieces to size. So if I have that, you can see that will fit plenty, and I'll have plenty of room for those sections. Then I put my fabrics in order, ready to sew. Okay, so I have my fabrics here in order, ready to sew. A1 is already glued on, so then I have A2, A3, etc. already there. Now, this isn't going to be a full-blown how to foundation paper piece tutorial. This is all about fussy cutting, right? So I'm assuming you know how to foundation piece, but I'll share just a few of my hints and tips. If you need directions on how you're going to actually foundation piece, I have a free tutorial with a pattern on my website at quietplaydesigns.com. Or you can check out my beginner's course called Foundation Paper Piecing Made Easy. And that's a work at your own pace with videos and a whole bunch of beginner-friendly patterns to get you going from the very start to become a really confident piecer with foundation piecing. So if you're looking for a foundation paper piecing course, go check that one out. If you're looking to talk about fussy cutting, that's what we're here for. All right, so just a few little basics. We have this one ready to go. I'm going to be sewing on A2 with my little corner section. Just remember to make sure you have your fabric placed over the seam line here with a 1/4 inch so that when you flip it back, you have enough in the seam allowance. Now you can pin to place it under the presser foot or just hold it quite firmly when you slide it under. Now I like to backstitch at the beginning end of my seam, just a couple stitches just to anchor in place. I don't like to stitch across the seams because I find it makes it harder to take the paper out when you go. So I just keep it within the seam. I don't go across in here or into the seam allowance. It's a personal preference. Now, what I'm showing you is a lazy girl's guide to foundation piecing. What you can do at this stage, obviously this is all excess fabric over our 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now you can take it to your cutting mat and trim it perfectly and tidily, right? Okay, so we're going to be tidying that. Or you can do it how I do, and I just fold the paper back and I eyeball it and I just trim that 1/4 inch, just like that. That's when I use the finger presser and push that seam into place with the finger presser like that. It just saves you a trip to the iron while you're piecing. Now, when I talked about going to the mat, a lot of people really love a ruler where you can just add a 1/4 where you're trimming and you're cutting. You can do that. Again, I'm a bit of a lazy piecer, so I'm just showing you how I do it. Now, once that's on, if you've pinned your fabric into place, you won't need the pin anymore because you've put you've got a seam holding your fussy cut into place. So then you're just going to go ahead and finish piecing all of those sections just in the exact same way so that your little tiny TV screen starts coming to life. So if you want to learn all the basics and see lots and lots of piecing, then check out the Foundation Paper Piecing Made Easy course. Otherwise, get stuck in and start piecing your tiny TV. So you can see it's starting to come together. I will be back once I've got this pieced, and then I will share a couple of tips with you on the next step. I've finished part A of our little tiny TV featuring the screen. I've trimmed all the threads on the back because it's easier to do it at this stage than later down the track. It still needs to be pressed and then have the templates trimmed to size. But I wanted to jump in to talk to you about part B, which I've started sewing, but then I thought, oh, I might share with you on how to deal with these angles, because that could be a bit of a pain in foundation paper piecing. So I thought I'd just share with you a couple of things we can do. So I've pieced just a few, and I'm up to, I've done 1, 2, and 3, so I'm up to piece 4, which is an angle with the antenna. Now this one's not too difficult to do because it's a thinner piece, but again, make sure you've got a big enough piece of fabric to be quite generous to go on all sides. Now when you have your piece of fabric, make it longer because you want it to cover past down here as well as up here, because otherwise if it's a bit short, you will actually end up with a gap of fabric in your seam allowance, and it's a little bit annoying. So make sure it goes all the way down. That one's the easiest version of how to deal with an angle. Just use a bigger piece of fabric. But sometimes the angles don't work quite as well for that, or they're quite large pieces of fabric. In general, I always recommend, however, that you do use a bigger piece of fabric than you think you're going to need, because it's so much better to cut off a bit of a scrap fabric than to have to unpick and redo. So that's the easy one. Most people can sort of work that one out. This next one is the tricky one, because you can cut a bigger piece of fabric to cover here all the way, but see how I'm missing that corner? If I do that, that's not going to be great. If that folds back, I could be too short. So what I've done is I've measured to cover it where it will go. Now this one's a little bit tricky, so bear with me. Okay, so I'm going to place the black fabric how it would be laying when the block is finished. Okay, then I'm going to flip it over to the other side and fold along my seam line. Now I'm going to finger press roll all the way along all the fabric to leave a really nice crease in my fabric. Can you see that crease? Seam beautifully there. Okay, then I'm going to hold it carefully in place because we know this is going to work exactly where it should go. I'm going to put my finger here as a reference point for when I flip it over for where the crease will be. Then you flip the fabric, line it up with your reference point, and then line your crease up with the crease on your fabric. So it's going to line up with the crease of where you're going to be sewing. It's a little bit hard to see because I use black fabric. Then you're going to stitch it just like you normally would. And it's going to look really funny because you're going to have this piece of fabric stitched at quite an odd angle, right? Which you probably wouldn't have normally gone, oh yeah, I'll place my fabric like that. But when you fold that back, right, it's piecing beautifully there. It's covering all of your template. See that? Oh, it's even outside the template. So that way I know it's going to cover. Now it's a little bit of a weird way to piece, and you know, it's a little bit of backwards kind of thinking, I guess, to try to flip it over and work that way, but it works. Now I have a tutorial, a step-by-step photo tutorial of how I do that on my website that you can check out at Quiet Play Designs. Honestly, it probably takes just a little bit of practice, but it's the best way that I've found to deal with those pesky angles. So I recommend giving that a try. But the biggest tip, use a bigger piece of fabric than you think you're going to need. All right, so I'm going to finish sewing that up and then I will show you our finished TV. Okay, here are my two sections ready to go together, nice and trimmed, tidy and pressed with a hot iron. So one tip I'll give you with pressing is use a dry iron, because potentially if you use steam, it can make the ink run on your templates, and you don't want that on your fabric because it would be a bit of a disaster, especially after all your beautiful piecing. So when we're joining our sections together, we just need to line them up on the edges. Now you can pin that in place if you need to, or use clove or wonder clips, whatever you need to hold it. Now I like to backstitch again at the beginning and also at the end when I join my sections together, just so that I've got more integrity in my block and it's held together. Okay, well I went a little bit wonky on that, but that's okay. It's a little bit tricky sewing with a camera right in front of your face, so please don't judge too harshly. All right, so that's on. Now the next thing I really want to stress to you, this is like I've said before, I'm a bit of a lazy piecer, but there's some things that I won't skimp on. And that is removing the paper in the seam allowance. Like remove it now. Like take those long skinny strips out now, because when you get to the end of this whole project, you do not want to be trying to get them out then when you've sewn this into other sections or when the seams are pressed flat. It makes life so much harder. So just remove those skinny strips now, and then all you're going to do is press. Now when you press it, press your seam this way, down this way, because if you press it up, you're dealing with a lot more bulk because of the antenna there. But if you're pressing it down, it's just onto a flat piece of fabric, and that way your block will sit a lot flatter. So I'm just going to go press that, and then I'll come back and we'll chat a little bit more about our tiny TVs. There we have it, a complete tiny TV, little 4-inch square block. Now, because it's foundation paper pieced, it does have your seam allowance added in. So this will actually measure 4.5 inches, but it's 4 inches finished. So now all you have to do is go make the rest of them with all those fun fussy cuts you chose. I hope you've enjoyed the challenge. I hope you've had fun fussy cutting along with me. If you would like to do more foundation paper piecing, I've got a whole bunch of patterns in my shop. You can find it via Quiet Play Designs. I also run a monthly membership designed specifically for the foundation paper piecing fanatic. It's called Make Mine Mini, and it's all about cute mini stuff, mini quilts and foundation paper piecing. I'd love for you to come and check it out and join us for a bunch of fun foundation piecing. So thanks for being part of the challenge. I cannot wait to see all your tiny TVs. Happy sewing.